Hello, everyone. First off, I'd like to pay my respects and acknowledge the owners of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and their elders past and present. It's been an interesting day. It's been an interesting night so far. It's been a hell of a day. Muhammad Ali, my hero, passed away, and I couldn't help. I shed a few tears in the Uber on the way here, so I apologize. My talk will be a little bit grim. But how are you all? My name is Abdullah. And I'm the youngest of 4 kids. My mum met my dad when he was studying with her older brother in Malaysia. My dad ended up getting kicked out of the country during some student protests, but while he travelled through Central Asia, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe, they kept in contact, and on the way back through to Australia, he came back to Malaysia, and they got married. He returned to Barella with a brand new, beautiful brown wife, and my mum arrived in a country that barely abolished the White Australia policy. Along the way, they had 4 kids, a girl, and then 3 boys, all called Abdul. The Abdul boys all went to art school. My brothers, the prototypes, they're still heavily involved in art. Abdul Karim, the oldest, he now runs art departments in West Australian Correctional Services. And Abdul Rahman, the middle Abdul, is a practicing artist and most recently showed at the Adelaide Biennale. My sister, the oldest of all of us, she didn't go to art school, she studied psychology, and now she owns a boxing gym. She's the boss. And my parents are pretty conservative. As children and as artists, we challenged our parents in every possible way that we could. And they've returned these challenges with unwavering love and support. Our dinner table is a bunch of big personalities speaking and yelling over each other, competing for the best story, memory, or joke, just like so many other Australian families. Now, as an Australian, I have a passport and a beautiful haircut. On my passport, it says my full name, Abdul Hamid bin Ibrahim bin Abdullah. It's quite a mouthful. It shows I'm 30, it shows my gender, and it shows my nationality. It shows my national identity. It shows that I'm an Australian, and I acknowledge all the benefits and privileges that are associated with these things. It shows my age. I'm not young, I'm not old, but I'm old enough to be a fully functional adult. It shows I'm a man, and as a man I'm afforded and acknowledge that I possess and take advantage of all the privileges of being a man. The gender biases. I walk home alone at night without fear. I assert myself into conversations and talk over people and know generally my opinion will still be taken into account. And I hold almost no concern for the physicality, sexual depravity and violent capacity of others. My passport also says I'm Australian, and here's where things get a bit sticky. I was born here. My family history on my father's side goes back to 1815, so 201 years. So quite long, longer than most. I grew up a few kilometres away from the hospital I was born in. English is my first and only language, and I've known no other home, but I sure as hell don't feel like an Australian. I know the advantages of being Australian. I know what the passport allows me. I can go anywhere, almost anywhere I want. There are a few places in the world where if I needed it, I couldn't call on the assistance of my government. I live a relatively comfortable life in a relatively safe country. If I'm sick, I go to the hospital. If I'm robbed, I go to the police. If my house catches on fire, I'll call the fire brigade. It's not Afghanistan. Where I live, there are no bushfires. Where I live in Sydney, there are no bushfires anyway. There are no mudslides or tidal waves, no tornadoes or earthquakes. This place has a lot going for it. But I'll tell you, it's still shit. And I'll tell you why. There are many reasons Australia is shit, but for now I'm going to concentrate on race. Now, there might be a few people who will say, if you don't like it, I should just leave. But that's to argue that unless you're 100% for every component in a system, you should extract yourself from the system. That's an argument against improvement and the betterment of society. It's kind of dumb. That's why it pisses me off when you hear older media commentators hark back to the good old days when people were even more racist and women were second-class citizens. In the 80s, when I was born in Perth, Jack Van Togeren was firebombing Chinese restaurants. In the 90s, a sitting member of Parliament warned Australia against the threat of being swamped by Asians. In the thousands, 5,000 drunk white people held a race riot in Cronulla. It's strange. I've been challenged a few times by people who insist that Cronulla wasn't about race or Muslims or people of colour. It was just about violent lebs, right? What about those Bangladeshi boys who copped the hiding? Or the T-shirts that read the ethnic cleansing unit? Ex-Sergeant Craig Campbell, who was there on the day and saved a few lives, told me that if I was there, due to the way that I look, I would have copped it too. There's no doubt in my mind it was super racist. Now, in the second decade of the 21st century, we're getting protests in every capital city in Australia against Muslims. And how many political parties have popped up in the last 24 months whose entire agenda is opposed to Muslims and Islam? Now, they'll tell me Islam's not a race, so how could they be racist? They would like to reduce racism to an exclusive prejudice against a specific tonality of a person's skin. I did a talk the other day at the Reconciliation Council about how it's still racist, but we don't have time today. See me later. Australia's war on terror, if you like it or not, is a war on Muslims. Once every 8 days in this country, a woman is killed by her husband, but there's no war on domestic violence. This can be hard to fathom if you don't experience racism. Being teased for having red hair is not the same. Being mocked for being fat or short, it's not the same. It doesn't come with a history and context of invasion, occupation, colonisation and exploitation. As an artist, I have a duty and an obligation to address these ills. People have asked me, why don't I address the problems in Islam or in the Muslim world with my art? Even the term Muslim world is problematic because it suggests a homogenous cultural group that exists exclusively distinct from any other. And of course, I acknowledge across the diversity of Muslim communities across the globe, there are problems. It doesn't help that the last 300 years or so of Islamic history is a history of being invaded and colonised. Now, for such a warlike, despotic lot, can you think of the last time a Muslim-majority country invaded a non-Muslim country? And then compare it to how many sovereign Muslim-majority countries have been invaded. All of them. But primarily, I rarely look at community problems in my art, because honestly, their effect on me is tiny to the point of non-existent, as they are to any of you, or any of those protesters who are against halal certification and the supposed Islamification of Australia. What does affect me is people like this. This is a work of mine from 2013 called Self-Portrait as an Ultranationalist. It's a self-portrait where I wanted to emphasise and hold a mirror up to the violent, threatening hate that is demonstrated by members of our shared Australian community. It's people like this who are an immediate threat to my family, my community and myself. I've always been a politically minded person, but I didn't feel confident enough in my own voice to tackle these things with my art until a few years into my practice, and after I'd had a personal taste of the direct vitriol after painting Walid Ali in the 2011 Archibald Prize. When the show toured to Tarawara Gallery, attendants told me they hadn't had such a divisive painting. People either liked it or absolutely hated it. And they hated it because of the combination of my name, because they didn't know anything else about me and had made a series of assumptions based on their prejudices. And my subject, because of what apparently he believes in, and that is so threatening to their way of life. Also, for the first time, got a spate of hate mail in response to my work. It's quite uncommon amongst artists, I think. Later in the year, I exhibited this photograph, that same year, 2011. It's called Them and Us, in the Blake Prize, where it went on to win the Blake Prize for Human Justice. In response to the announcement, the Sydney representative for the Christian Democratic Party wrote that I worshipped a moon god and was out to convert young Australia. I again got a spate of hate mail. What also affects me is the popular perception of Muslims and how that influences a bias against Muslims. And I want to be clear here, I'm speaking as a Muslim and not on behalf of Muslims. There's a big difference. Thank you. This work is called You See Monsters, from a series called Siege that I made in 2014. It's another self-portrait where I embody what I believe to be what people think of Muslims. To many, we are monsters. We are not human. And the danger of being seen as something other than human gives license for others to treat you inhumanely, as has been demonstrated by the evidence of torture and the civilian death tolls in places like Iraq. These next two works are from the same series, and they're called The Disaffected Byproduct of the Colonies and We Are the Ones That Look Back from the Abyss. Here I was looking at events like the Arab uprisings and the London riots in 2011. When I talk about the disaffected byproducts of the colonies, I'm talking about the continual effect of generational disadvantage that was instigated and maintained by colonial occupation and exploitation. Colonialism didn't do any lasting favours for the colonised. When I showed this painting at the Art Gallery of WA, there were complaints and threats made to the gallery because it was believed by exhibiting the work the gallery was supporting terrorism. I used balaclavas as a motif that signified the projection or perception of criminality and terrorism. I didn't think this specific work would instigate more projections, I was being playful with the idea. The left eye belongs to Beyonce, the right eye belongs to Kanye, and the mouth belongs to Madonna. That's a long way from Al-Qaeda. The idea for the following work, The Wedding, originated from an article that spoke about the justifications of infants killed in military strikes by saying they would grow up to be terrorists anyway, or describing children killed in drone strikes as fun-sized terrorists. This projection of criminality on universally, quantifiably innocent human beings, infants and children, appalled me. Instead of depicting children explicitly, I removed myself a step from the initial idea and chose a wedding as an almost universally understood ritual of union and optimistic celebration. I again used a balaclava to subvert and confuse superficial readings of the image. I want the audience to question what they're seeing and to question their own perceptions. A dear friend of mine once said about my work, it's like you're trying to punch people in the guts. Beautifully. I can't think of a better description. I'm not trying to hit my head over the head with my indignation and anger, although I am angry. I'm trying to seduce them. I'm not interested in sympathy. What I really want is empathy. I want people to question their biases. I want people to question what they hold to be true. I want to work towards effecting positive change by encouraging a better shared understanding of our mutual, fallible humanity. Thank you very much.